Hi there, it's Stephanie with Project Vibrancy. I thought I would talk today about summer entertaining because the July 4th holiday is coming up here in the United States. And, it's summer here, so we're barbecuing and cooking outside as much as possible. One of the things about living in Minnesota is that since we're relatively housebound for, 5 to 6 months of the year, when it finally gets warm outside, warm enough to actually be outside and be cooking, it's like everybody is outside all day, every day, as much as entirely possible. So Minnesotans are crazy about barbecues and about cooking outside and having picnics and eating outside, and it's super fun. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm stephanie.a.meyer, and pretty much my whole Instagram stories are about being outside. Once we're into this time of year, I had a picnic earlier this week. Just a girlfriend and I took some simple snacky food and kombucha and went and sat by one of the city lakes that I live near, Lake of the Isles, and had this beautiful picnic. And last night I was invited out to my friends Ralph and Lindsay Basham, who have an absolutely epic garden. If you saw my Instagram stories, people thought I was in France. I had so many friends say, "Where are you? Oh my God, I didn't realize that you went to France," because they have these little white alpine strawberries, and Ralph has all these amazing fruit trees that they actually bring indoors in the winter, and that's why it looked like I was in France, because we can't grow peaches and figs in Minnesota just natively. They need protection over the winter, but it's just outside all the time, and so it's really fun to talk about cooking foods that are beautiful for barbecues. There are a few things that make foods really work well for outdoor meals, and that's what I thought I would share with you today. So, of course, the number one thing that I'm going to say is that, I know it. The first thing I'm going to say is that if you are following an elimination diet like the autoimmune protocol or Whole30 or some other elimination diet because you're working on finding food sensitivities, it's really important to keep socializing and to entertain. One of the first things that happens for people who kind of dig in and start to look at food sensitivities, or maybe are following AIP to manage their autoimmune disease, is that people stop socializing, and it's very isolating, and it can make you very resentful of following along these healthy eating guidelines and really digging into figuring out what your food sensitivities are. So I really want to encourage you to entertain. It's the best way because you have control of the food, of course. And by the way, nobody even needs to know that you're following AIP or that you're doing an elimination diet or that the whole meal is going to be Whole30, because you can encourage your guests to bring something that they might love to eat. You could certainly let them know that you might not be able to partake so that their feelings aren't hurt when you don't eat what they have. But your menu can be completely AIP and nobody will ever know because it's really just delicious, real food. People get too hung up on thinking this is restrictive and no one's going to want to eat this, and it's just not true, because this is AIP food is really just all the best meats and vegetables and fruits and oils and herbs and all of the great things that chefs love to work with, and the food can be beautiful and it really suits this time of year. So I want to encourage you to entertain more when you're going through some sort of a healing diet or elimination diet, because it's the best way to socialize with people and share delicious food with them and be able to have control over the food, which is a lot harder to do in restaurants. That'll be a different talk. By the way, I'll just say this as an aside. I did put a post in the Food Reaction Freedom Find Your Best Foods Facebook group that I have going, and I'll put a link to that below if you're interested in joining it. It's where we're talking about elimination diets and about staying motivated to be on an elimination diet. And yesterday I put a post in there about how to eat out if you're on an elimination diet. So if you are curious about that, before I get to talking about it here on a Facebook Live, then go ahead and join that group and you can see that post in there. And people had really good questions. It was a good conversation. But back to entertaining. So my first tip, of course, is going to be to work ahead I'm a huge fan of batch cooking, which if you follow me at all, you know my meal plans, Project Vibrancy meals, are based on batch cooking because it's really the only way that you can eat food that you prepared at home quickly throughout the week and have it be delicious, really consistently stick to it. The magic is the structure behind the meal plans, and that is batch cooking on the weekend, which is cooking a significant amount of food, a couple proteins, some really delicious condiments, chopping some veggies, roasting some starches, and banking that in the fridge and having it ready to go. And the same applies when you are entertaining. So working ahead is the key to being a relaxed host or hostess and being able to enjoy your guests without being buried in the kitchen the entire time. You know how that goes. Certainly there are always people that are willing to help you out in the kitchen, but it's not the same as being a part of your own party. And the way to be part of the party is to have done a significant amount of the work ahead of time. So that's my number one tip. My second tip is to keep the food, of course, really delicious and colorful and bright and all the good party things, but to keep it relatively healthy. That is, I used to, back in the day, back in the olden days, parties were all about decadence and indulgence for me. And I used to do a holiday party when I owned my first home and when I was first married. And we would do this party that was all about decadence. I would cook for a month ahead of this party and like bank stuff in the freezers and in the freezer. We only had one freezer. And it was just like, I would spend the entire evening just putting one appetizer after another out on the table. And don't get me wrong, it was very fun and everybody loved the food and it is super fun to indulge during the holidays. But when my health became a concern and food became the path to healing, I really wanted to find a way to have delicious food and have food that made me feel good and didn't weigh me down and feel overly rich. And still, in a way, it's more fun. It's not that fun to eat a gut bomb. At least it's not that fun for me anymore. And I don't like the way I feel when I have food that is just, one rich thing on top of the other. And so I really plan menus in a very different way now. And I choose one pretty indulgent thing. Let's say the ribs that I posted 2 weeks ago on my blog, Fresh Tart. I wanted to get that out to you with an autoimmune protocol version ahead of the 4th of July holiday. And so I've got two versions on there, just kind of a classic, ribs with the nightshade loaded, chilies in the rub and the barbecue sauce with the tomato and chilies and, whatever, the classic. And then I have an Asian inspired autoimmune protocol version for those of you who can't do the nightshades. And so they're both great, by the way. And so with those ribs, that's a pretty rich entree. So there's a reason that ribs are often served with coleslaw, like with a vinegary coleslaw, because having something with crunch and acid is a really nice foil for having that, fattier, richer meat and the richness of those sauces. So sort of keep that in mind as you're planning the menu. If you've got one main rich thing, like if you're going to braise or slow grill or smoke, like a pork shoulder, same as the ribs, I would go with a very tart salad. I'd either do a kale salad. I've got a couple of great ones on my blog, Fresh Tart. One has lemon and a lot of dill. And if you can eat dairy, it's got feta. If you can eat nuts and seeds, it's got, pine nuts or pepitas on it. And it's great. It's called Abigail and Arthur's Kale Salad. And then I've got another one that's called a raw Tuscan kale salad. And you can make that AIP also just by omitting the gluten-free breadcrumbs and the Parmesan. But the very lemony tart dressing on both of those salads is great with kale. It softens it up, kind of cooks it a little bit, and that acid is really important when you're eating this other very rich thing. And so keep that in mind. Pick one rich thing, and then of course, you've got dessert, and we'll get to that in a second. The dessert is always going to be the indulgence. I almost like to keep it to one rich entree, a lot lighter sides, and then know that you're going to do something super fun for dessert. So that's sort of the overall structure. And then I love to put out snacks that aren't super heavy. So I don't like to do, a big, rich, cheesy snacks, because then you kind of destroy your appetite for the main course. And so I tend to pick snacks that are just fun and kid-friendly and super easy to prepare. I don't think a 4th of July party is necessarily the time to bust out super fancy canapes and, things like that. It's just fun snack food. People are drinking beer, probably, certainly drinking wine, standing around chatting. And so having little snacky things that aren't super heavy is really fun. One of my favorite party things to set out, and it always ends up being what everyone eats throughout the party, including at the end of the night, to kind of take the edge off maybe the alcohol that people have had to drink. I love to pop popcorn, not in a microwave, no microwave popcorn, popping it on the stovetop in really good oil, as in some bacon fat or some avocado oil, something that can take high heat but isn't going to break. Don't pop popcorn in canola oil, please. It tastes fishy and broken and burned, and I hate canola oil anyway. But I would pop it in avocado oil or in bacon fat, because it can take the heat and it adds a little nice smoky flavor. And then I love to just top it with browned butter. Instead of just melted butter, if you go a little extra time and you let the little bits of dairy protein brown, and you can take it to a light brown all the way to a beurre noisette, which is, like a dark brown. They all taste amazing. They almost have a cheesiness to them. And popcorn with brown butter, and then an adequate amount of very finely ground sea salt. You could even do some black pepper if you like pepper on popcorn, although kids tend to hate it. So if you've got kids coming, don't do that. But this is sort of my famous appetizer. And even when my son was growing up and he would have friends come over for, to play video games or to watch movies or whatever, I would make this popcorn for them, and his friends would just be like, why is this popcorn so good? Because the only popcorn they'd ever had was popped in a microwave. So you can kind of blow people away with very little effort just by popping some popcorn. So I usually do a big bowl of that. And then for some autoimmune protocol ideas, it's, guacamole without chilies in it is actually incredibly fantastic, and nobody really knows the difference. So I just make a classic guacamole with plenty of lime and, a little bit of onion. You could even do scallion greens if you're doing a lower FODMAP kind of diet, and a little garlic, or skip that if you're doing low FODMAP. But whatever, just doing the classic guacamole without putting jalapeno and tomatoes in it is actually super delicious. It's the creaminess that it turns out is so good with the lime. And then you can choose, some plantain chips that are fried in coconut oil, basically, or some pork rinds, but a chip that fits the autoimmune protocol. That's a lovely snack. It's not too rich, and it can sit there for a while and be fantastic over time. And then, of course, fresh fruit, especially if you've got kids coming. What is amazing is that the kids will really eat a lot of fruit. Strawberries in Minnesota are incredible right now. I always, for 4th of July, put out some local strawberries. They can be found at the farmer's market. Just a bowl of them. They go like that, and they're so good. But then certainly adding other kid favorites like grapes, and then if you want to get a little fancy, there's some good peaches that are starting to come into Minnesota right now. I've got a recipe on my blog for a grilled peach appetizer that is topped with crispy prosciutto. So you bake prosciutto until it falls, basically shatters into shards, and you shatter that over the top of the grilled peaches. And then the base of it, if you could eat dairy, can be ricotta. If you can't, you can do like a coconut yogurt, or you can even skip that part. But it's kind of nice to have that creaminess. And then the grilled peaches are ridiculous, and lots of fresh basil, and then that salty pork. So it ends up being rather light, even though it's got some rich components, because you just have a little bit of the ricotta, a little bit of the crispy prosciutto, and it's very impressive and pretty. So that recipe is on my blog, Fresh Tart. I will link to all of these in the comments below, by the way. And then one last little appetizer that's so fun, and I was actually introduced to it at a 4th of July barbecue at my house. I've got a recipe on my blog, Fresh Tart, for shrimp that are wrapped they're kind of a saltimbocca twist. So shrimp, and you put a sage leaf on them, wrap them in pancetta, very, very thin, non-smoky Italian bacon. And you can do them on the grill, or you can saute them in a pan, and then you finish them with squeezes of lemon. And I have to say that the first time I had it, we put this platter of it out on the table. I turned away for a minute, and everyone was kind of walking up to the table. I turned away for a second. I turned back around, and it was like wolves had gone at these shrimp. Everyone was just like, grab, gone. And it was over. And I was like, wow, I'm glad I tasted one as I was plating it, because they were gone in a flash. So that's a very fun appetizer, and in effect, very light. It's a little fancier if you're doing a little fancier barbecue. So keep that in mind. I'll link to that recipe too. And then, of course, July 4th is about grilling. The rib recipe that I mentioned before is a do-ahead, finish on the grill recipe. So you basically slow bake the ribs, and then you finish them on the grill. And that is a great party trick. Works like a charm. Burgers, of course, are a classic. I love to do burgers for a party because everybody loves them. You can customize with cheese if you've got people who can't do dairy, and if you're doing AIP. I suggest making a big pan of beautifully, perfectly, slowly caramelized onions. They are a wonderful stand-in for dairy. The other obvious one is avocado, but if you're already doing guacamole for the appetizer, maybe you don't want to do avocado on the burger. And the caramelized onions are so decadent and rich, and they give you, the sensation of eating something that is, like melted cheesy. And so I think they are an awesome thing to set out, especially for the people who are dairy-free, to have on their burgers. And then, you can do regular buns for the people that are gluten-full. I'm not a big fan of gluten-free buns. They tend to not taste that great. Gluten-free English muffins are sometimes a better choice. And I love to do the plantain tortilla recipe that's on my blog, but make them a little bit thicker. So make the batter thicker, and I would bake them a little bit lower and slower so that they bake all the way through. But you can make something that, you can hold the sandwich, the hamburger with, if you do that, and it's quite delicious. So, and you can customize the size. So even if you're doing kind of like more slider size burgers, you can make little kind of sliders with a little bit thicker plantain tortilla. That's a very good trick, and they're really yummy. And then of course you can always just go a completely separate way. I have a recipe for Vietnamese skewers, which are almost sausages that you create yourself. They can fit the autoimmune protocol, and they're seasoned ground pork, and you form them around a skewer, grill them, and then you serve them in lettuce wraps with lovely pickled things and fresh mint and fresh basil. And if you can eat rice, you can set out a bowl of rice, or you could set out a bowl of cauliflower rice. And that is a great party food. People can kind of eat them standing up, or you can, put them on a buffet and people can eat them over plates. But just really fun, handheld food. Gives you a little bit different twist than a burger. And then a little bit similar to that, I love to do steak for 4th of July parties too, because everybody loves steak. And I've got a recipe for a Korean style steak, a Korean bulgogi style steak, which is a steak that's slashed and slashed almost to the point where it's kind of falling apart, and you rub a marinade into it that's got a little bit of sugar in it. I've got an AIP version of it with, I believe, maple syrup or honey and other seasonings. And if you can eat sesame seeds, it's got sesame in it. And then you just do a hot, fast grill, slice it super thin, and it's great that way, but it would be amazing on top of a cold noodle salad. And the one fantastic AIP noodle is sweet potato starch noodles. You can order them off Amazon. You can get them at like United Noodles here in the Twin Cities, like in an Asian grocery store. They're Korean. They're called, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's japchae, Japchae is the other name for it. And that's the dish that it often shows up in. But those noodles can be used for a cold noodle salad, and they're really delicious. In fact, I almost prefer them because they don't fall apart the way that rice noodles do. So, you could do the bulgogi on top and do a really fun kind of noodle salad with lots of fresh herbs and chopped fresh lettuce, mixed with the noodles and a great dipping sauce. The dipping sauce that goes with those skewers would be incredible on top of that salad, and other kind of pickled veggies. You could do some kind of medium boiled eggs with it. That would be a very different twist on 4th of July, but it sure would be good. So, and that could travel too. That would be it'd be fun to show up with that cold noodle salad, finish the hot steak, and then just serve that on top of it. So kind of a fun idea. By the way, I think I said this, that I'm going to map out some of these menu ideas on my blog in a little bit. And then, I want to talk about salads. So bringing a salad to a barbecue, it's obviously really important to bring one that can sit on the buffet without getting watery and wilted and kind of falling apart. And there's a reason that coleslaw ends up being a salad that people take to barbecues, of course. My trick for coleslaw is to start the night before, shred the cabbage, salt it pretty well. I've said this before. And then put it all in a colander over a bowl and put it in the fridge and just cover it with a towel. And the salt draws a lot of liquid out of the cabbage, but it leaves it still crunchy. And then you just discard the water that drained out, spin it dry. You can decide if you think it's too salty, you can give it a rinse and then spin it dry. Or if it's like pleasantly salty, I just leave it and spin it to spin away the extra moisture. And then you've got cabbage that isn't going to wilt and get watery after you put the dressing on it. And the nice thing is then you can put the dressing on it and let it sit for a while, and it really, the cabbage really soaks up the dressing. The flavors are a lot better, because the alternative is to dress the cabbage right before you sit down. But, it doesn't absorb kind of in the same way, and it never tastes quite as good. So that's the trick for making slaw ahead of time. And not having it be a watery mess. And then I already talked about the kale salad, which I think is amazing, either one of those. And they can both be made ahead because the lemon kind of softens up the kale and it sits really beautifully. And those are two of my favorites both those kale salads, to take to someone else's house. Okay, they can sit outside on a hot day and not be a hot mess. They can still be delicious. So, and then desserts. I like to offer desserts that have fruit in them because 'tis the season, and I've got a classic dessert on my blog. It's been there for years. My friend Susie Schubert first brought a blueberry kuchen, which is a blueberry tart, to a 4th of July party years ago, and I've been obsessed with it ever since, and I've riffed on it for years. I created a gluten-free version. I created a grain-free version. I created an autoimmune protocol version. So I think there's 3 different versions on Fresh Tart, www.freshtart.com. And it has cooked blueberries, so you bake it with the blueberries in it, and then to finish it, when it comes out of the oven and it's still hot, you press raw blueberries into the top and sprinkle some sugar over the top of it. And that combination of the cooked blueberries and the raw blueberries is like the most amazing thing. It is the best dessert. And then you just do that with ice cream. And if you wanted to, you could do strawberry ice cream or, something to add a red element to it so that you had a red, white, and blue. I think one year I pressed blueberries and raspberries, raw blueberries and raspberries into the top of it, and then served it with vanilla ice cream or whipped cream. I'm not sure. That would be a very fun idea. I think that is on my blog somewhere. So it's marvelous made ahead, and it's pretty foolproof, and everybody loves it. The other dessert that travels really well is panna cottas, which are basically a pudding, a custard that's made usually with dairy, but you can also make it with coconut milk. And the thickener, instead of eggs, is gelatin. So it's very easy to work with. You can make it into jars. I love to do that, into little jars and have the lids on them, and you can totally take it with you. And then you can top it with any number of things. So I've got a coffee panna cotta that is, I love coffee desserts. So that one is just like, incredible to me. That would be delicious with some berries on top. I've got a coconut sweetened with maple syrup. That's an autoimmune protocol. Also fantastic with berries. I have, oh my gosh, sweet corn panna cotta. I have 2 sweet corn panna cotta recipes on the blog. They are both utterly, unspeakably delicious, like dangerously delicious. I think I've got more than that even. So big panna cotta fan, lots of panna cotta recipes on Fresh Tart. Have a look and then just think about, don't worry about like inverting them onto plates and all the things that I did to make it pretty for the blog. Just serve them right out of jars or little cups or little even shot glasses kind of a thing, and keep it really simple. Everyone loves that. And then I want to make a plug for strawberry shortcakes. I don't have an autoimmune protocol strawberry shortcake. They do exist out there. I saw one on Instagram the other day. If you Google it, I'm sure you could come to it. Made with the Otto's cassava flour, and that would be super fun to play with. I like to make shortcakes just with gluten-free, all-purpose flour. I just use Bob's 1-to-1, and I follow the Marion Cunningham cream biscuit recipe. You can Google it. I don't think I've shared it on Fresh Tart. I'll have to take a look. But they are the easiest biscuits in the entire world to make. It is literally just the flour, some leavening, baking powder, and then cream. There's no butter. There's no rolling them out. There's not doing none of that. And I like to put a fair amount of salt. I like salt with strawberry shortcake. I like the salty. It's because I grew up with my mom making Bisquick shortcakes, and Bisquick is so salty, but the salty with the sweet with the whipped cream is a very delicious thing. So I make sure that the biscuits have, the adequate amount of salt in them. And then you just drop them. They're just drop biscuits, unbelievably easy and perfect for shortcakes. And then you split them and do the mass of amazing strawberries inside. You could do blueberries too for 4th of July, and then loads of not too sweet whipped cream. So dream dessert as far as I'm concerned. Peach shortcake, also incredibly delicious, but that is an easy tip for the most simple, incredibly delicious shortcakes. Do the Marion Cunningham cream biscuits. Feel free to use gluten-free flour and you will love them. So, okay, I'm gonna stop there. I'm making myself really hungry. It's going to be, I don't even know what I'm doing for 4th of July yet, but I'll be making some sort of delicious food in some way. I wanted to make sure to include a plug again for the Food Reaction Freedom Find Your Best Foods group on Facebook, because I'm sharing recipes and 4th of July menus with that group. And I will also be putting similar into the Project Vibrancy Meals private Facebook group. That's just for people who are paid members of Project Vibrancy Meals, but you have access to this private Facebook group, and I like to share holiday menus in there and extra tips and all sorts of good things if you're a member in there. So anyhow, those are my ideas for now. Stay tuned for the blog post that will be coming later today. I will remember to come back and link it below into the comments, and then I will link to the recipes that I mentioned as well. If you have questions about customizing food for your elimination diet or your healing diet, make sure to leave them below. I love to answer questions like that. And I think that's it. Have an awesome weekend. Happy grocery shopping. If you're doing some cooking ahead, good luck. And I will be back next Thursday to talk about, I had an idea, I mentioned it earlier and now it is escaping me. Oh, eating in restaurants. That's probably what I'll talk about next week. So, all right, take care, you guys. Bye.